Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Last year, Russia tried to turn off the lights across all of Ukraine. This year, it's hunting cities one by one, not looking for a blackout, but a pressure point. The message is simple. Moscow doesn't need to freeze the whole country if it can break Kharkiv, Dnipro, or Zaporizhia first. Now, for the third winter in a row, Russia is preparing to weaponize cold. But unlike back in 2022, when Moscow tried to plunge all of Ukraine into darkness, and unlike 2023-24, when it tested the grid's endurance, this winter marks a shift in doctrine. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Ukraine's power grid is under siege once again. From Chernihiv to Kharkiv, the country's northern and northeastern regions have plunged into crisis as Russian strikes cripple key energy infrastructure. Transformer stations, thermal plants and repair depots have turned into battlegrounds in what Kyiv calls an energy war. According to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, the first half of 2025 brought the heaviest energy losses since the invasion began. More than half of pre-war generating capacity is now gone, including around 70% of thermal generation. In some areas, maintenance teams can't even start repairs. Russian drones circle overhead, making every attempt to fix the grid a potential death trap. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's strikes are not random but systematic, a calculated assault on the very fabric of civilian life.
We are ready for diplomacy, but as I told the US president, the issue is that we don't see Russia's willingness to negotiate. All the diplomatic gestures it makes, through calls or messages, are aimed at delaying decisive actions by the US and Europe.
Despite the devastation, international support remains Ukraine's power lifeline. The Energy Support Fund has gathered nearly 1.3 billion euro in aid, but Ukraine still faces a shortfall of around 400 million euros needed to stabilize the grid. From Brussels to Washington, governments and private partners are urged to help rebuild what Russia keeps tearing down. For now, Ukraine's engineers and soldiers fight the same war, one with wrenches and cables, the other with air defenses and drones. In this battle for electricity, resilience has become the nation's brightest light.
And now, let's zone in on the east-planing portion of our show. Ukraine is once again bracing for nationwide power cuts. Following one of the largest Russian missile barrages in months, authorities are rationing electricity across all regions to stabilize the grid and restore power to areas left in the dark.
Starting at 4 p.m., the state energy operator Ukrenergo has introduced hourly rolling outages across the country. Up to 3 consumer groups will lose power simultaneously under these emergency schedules, which apply to all regions where blackouts were in effect since the morning. The goal is to restore supply to households that have been cut off the longest after overnight Russian strikes hit energy and civil infrastructure across multiple regions, including Kyiv, Dnipro and Kharkiv. From 4 to 10 p.m., restrictions also apply to industrial users, as authorities race to balance the damaged system. Detailed schedules are being published by regional energy providers to help residents plan for evening hours without electricity. Emergency shutdowns were introduced early on October 22nd, after Russia launched another large-scale missile and drone attack, the latest in its campaign to cripple Ukraine's energy network ahead of the winter. For millions of Ukrainians, these blackouts have become a grim routine. Yet behind every switch-off lies the same struggle to keep the lights on despite the war.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Around the turn of September and October, Russia launched yet another concentrated wave of strikes against Ukraine's energy network. But what matters most is what changed. Instead of spreading attacks thinly across the country, the Kremlin now focuses firepower on bottleneck targets: regional distribution hubs, gas compressor stations, municipal-level substations. Now, the places air defense is weakest and disruption is densest. Now, one precision hit on a city like Kharkiv hurts more than 5 glancing blows on far-flung grid components. Ukraine, for its part, is better prepared. Since last winter, Kyiv has repaired transmission lines, hardened key substations, and rebuilt generation capacity, most of it decentralized, meaning harder to disable in a single strike. Meanwhile, gas storage is strong. Over 89 terawatt per hour stocked by mid-October, more than last year. Electricity exports continue throughout the summer, a sign that the system had a surplus. And importantly, Ukraine's engineers have learned the battlefield rhythm, scattering supply, burying links, and segmenting the grid. But readiness does not always equal to safety. Because Russia's new strategy is not about collapsing the system, it's about overloading local failure points. When a frontline city loses power and heat in midwinter, Russia achieves two victories at once: a humanitarian crisis and a military complication. Civilians flee, troops face unrest, administration falters. This was visible in Kharkiv after recent strikes on two of its key substations. The city's mayor had already warned that this winter may be the hardest yet. The weak link is no longer just transmission, it's also distribution. Ukraine's large, well-fortified nodes can withstand sustained attack. However, the regional infrastructure is often exposed, lightly reinforced and spread across territory that's difficult to protect. A $20,000 Russian loitering munition can inflict millions in damage simply by hitting the right node. And then there is the unanswered question: can Moscow sustain this tempo? Historically, the Kremlin has attacked Ukraine's energy system in bursts, massive, punishing, but sporadic. Pauses have always followed periods of overextension. The Russian arsenal is not infinite, neither are its Iranian-supplied drones. The Kremlin may yet be forced back into conservation mode. But if the current intensity continues into, say, January and February, Ukraine will experience not a nationwide blackout, but a patchwork winter. Some regions stable, others in intermittent crisis, safe cities warm, exposed cities freezing. Zaporizhia lit while Kharkiv goes dark. A map not of electricity, but of vulnerability. And that is Russia's real objective: fragmentation, to turn the heating season into a psychological siege, to force Ukrainians to feel isolated city by city until exhaustion becomes political pressure. In 2022, the Kremlin tried to turn off the lights for Ukraine. In 2025, it is trying to turn off the hope in specific cities where Russia strikes, and whether those cities stay warm may prove as decisive as any battle on the front line. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Mark McNamee, a co-founder of Ukraine Business News Network. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, of course, there's no secret that Moscow is trying to target Ukraine's energy infrastructure once again ahead of winter to weaponize the cold. But as we see, Ukraine also has strategized around it and has a more decentralized approach when it comes to its power supplies. Can we expect a different attack pattern going forward?
Well, from Russia, I would say not necessarily different from what they've been doing the last few months. But they're of course, frankly, they've learned a lot of lessons, and they've been quite effective, particularly in the last few months. And this really goes to the point that we've likely discredited a lot of the learning that Russia has done over the course of this war. It's been delayed. There's other areas of the war, other aspects that they clearly have not learned and have not implemented lessons learned. But in this case, they have clearly been much more effective because they have really ingrained a lot of these lessons learned. And they've, of course, increased the quantity of projectiles. So the production rates of both the drones, different types of drones, decoy drones as well, how effective those are, and then the missiles. These are all unfortunately having a quite devastating effect. Now, that said, on the Ukrainian side, of course, we are seeing countermeasures, and this has been a consistent war on the land and in the air and at sea of measures and countermeasures and measures and countermeasures back and forth. And fortunately for the Ukrainian side, I know this from personal experience from speaking with a number of Miltech investors, and specifically in counter drones, interceptor drones, and the like, who have demonstrated very clearly the effectiveness of a lot of these different, really, it's a technological war here, right? I mean, just the different advances, and literally in matters of weeks and months, to be able to thwart a lot of these attacks coming from Russia. Unfortunately, of course, we're really hitting, as one Miltech investor told me, we're really hitting an inflection point here as we approach winter in this technological war in the air, in the skies over Ukraine. And so this winter could be very, very telling. We will see, but it's quite unanimous, speaking with energy experts here on the ground, speaking with those deeply involved specifically in drones and counter-drone warfare, that this is going to be the most brutal winter for Ukraine. It depends on a lot of factors, of course, but we should really be bracing for the worst and have to struggle through this difficult winter. There's no denying it.
Right. What do you think so far is the more effective strategy to try to shoot down a lot of these projectiles coming in to hit the Ukrainian infrastructure, or perhaps a restructuring of how the power supply, how the grid works in order to avoid some of these targeting?
Yeah, I mean, that's an extremely difficult question to answer. First of all, some of this is confidential. So I've even asked that question to a number of people, and you don't necessarily get straight answers because you can't give away state secrets. And these things are developing quickly. And if Russia finds out things, then you have. So that said, look, and I know this from speaking with businesses, creating a lot of defense structure, of course, around energy infrastructure is vital and effective, and it has been effective for the last couple of years. And one thing that should make us somewhat hopeful about this winter is that there's been a lot of plans and measures and contingencies put into place by businesses, by regional governments, in order to adapt to this. This is not our first time around, is the point. So how do you best protect if you do have destroyed infrastructure? How quickly can you get things back online? And what alternatives do you have? And as mentioned, speaking with businesses here, one reason I am relatively hopeful is that they have, based upon the last couple of winters, developed alternative energy sources. So if something does go down, they can actually move to other energy sources and keep the lights on, keep the business moving along. Now, that doesn't necessarily help, let's say, residences at the much larger level, but that does, of course, help keep the economy sort of churning if businesses can keep themselves afloat.
Right. When it comes to a stockpile of fuel, do you think that these local communities or residents will have enough backed up in order to kind of last through the winter, or are we seeing any sort of shortages in particular?
Yeah, so of course, my answer would be likely they do. And from looking at the numbers and speaking with people who are on the ground, likely do. However, there's just so many open-ended questions, as we saw with the last couple of winters, that how much of that fuel will actually be needed? What type of winter do we have? How cold? How windy will it be? How much can we rely on, say, wind power? So there's a lot, and of course, how much further destruction of the infrastructure will there be from further Russian attacks, and how effective can the developing defense technology that Ukraine is developing here, how effective can that be to continue to protect in these critical weeks and months ahead? So there's so many questions, but to give you a direct answer, the answer is likely that there's probably enough under sort of base case expectations, under sort of current assumptions where we are, but things, of course, can move in different directions. The positive thing is that for the last 2 years, we have avoided the worst case scenarios very clearly across the country. And that's just not in the major cities, but really across the country. We avoided the worst case scenarios for a variety of reasons. So let's hope that, again, we can avoid worst case scenarios this winter as well.
Right, like you mentioned, there was a very bad situation back then where Russia managed to collapse much of Ukraine's energy infrastructure system, but it does seem like they're changing their doctrine as well, focusing on overloading more like local failure points, especially if it's something close to the front line or causing some sort of humanitarian crisis. Do you think that this will have the same type of widespread impact, or do you think that the Russians have to choose this approach precisely because they no longer are able to cause a large-scale systemic failure?
Yeah, most likely the latter, and so it's a different approach, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't necessarily be as effective. And you mentioned the frontline communities. That's really where, and even the cities, say 100 miles from the front line, so relatively close. That's really where Russia can be most effective and cause the most trauma. Now, granted, they're looking to, of course, cause extreme trauma nationwide. But to your point, they can cause a really difficult humanitarian tragedy by directing their resources to almost exclusively towards those frontline areas and the cities 100 miles, say, from the front. And again, just causing more trauma for the population, more psychological terror, pushing people away from those regions and into the rest of Ukraine, into other countries potentially, and just keeping up that consistent pressure again. And that, again, it's the psychological terror. And I can attest to that, being on the ground here, living through that. The worst part isn't necessarily thinking you're never going to have water or heat again. It's just dealing with this over and over, and how extremely disruptive it is, of course, how scary it is, dealing with these raids, life-threatening, of course. But I think from Russia's point of view, as you were mentioning, this somewhat different tactic, it can be very, very effective. Likely taking out the entire energy infrastructure is almost impossible, but being more focused and having a more targeted approach. And again, if they were to focus more, I would say it would probably be more effective if they were to focus even more on sort of those frontline eastern areas, which they will, of course, but that can be quite devastating in and of itself, as opposed to maybe focusing on, say, far western regions, which may not have as much of an effect.
Right. I'm also curious because after many iterations of Russian attack on the Ukrainian power grid, we've seen some restructuring, redrawing of some of the grids, and it doesn't function the way it does in a peacetime scenario. Do you think that after the war, we're going to see a more kind of decentralized approach of power, be it generation or supply, or is it going to revert back to a more efficient way of doing things? Because I can imagine it will still be a little bit of a kind of risk in the back of their mind of potential future attacks or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's been the strategic policy going back to 22 and 2023, is to have this more decentralized system. One, this is already kind of the long-term trajectory, getting away from the Soviet energy system. And this is prior to the full-scale invasion in 2022. Having a decentralized system is actually more effective and more efficient. So it makes more sense that they would be moving in that direction. The renewable energy push, of course, which is going on very strongly here, kind of people aren't quite noticing, but going on very strongly here, and is a key reform that's a part of Ukraine's EU accession path as well. So it's very important on a number of levels, including the political level. But the whole point is, the decentralization is part of the strategic direction anyhow. Russia is actually helping them by doing these attacks, sort of accelerate that this path anyhow. And this will make for a much more secure and effective and efficient energy system permanently for Ukraine for the next generation. So it's actually helping move things in the right direction. So Ukraine will be far better off. And also to reiterate, the security reasons you mentioned going forward, Russia will still be its next door neighbor.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight, and really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on Eastern Express. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Access to WhatsApp and Telegram is being throttled across Russia, a move that digital rights groups warn could be a prelude to full nationwide bans by early 2026.
Nearly 40% of Russia's regions are now facing restricted access to WhatsApp and Telegram, according to the independent monitoring group Nasvyatsi. The state internet watchdog Roskomnadzor claims the move is a response to criminal activity, accusing both platforms of enabling fraud, sabotage and recruitment for terrorist acts. But critics say this is a smokescreen for censorship. Analysts believe the restrictions are part of a wider campaign to control digital communication, following a similar trajectory that saw YouTube fully blocked in 2024. The crackdown comes alongside a dramatic drop in mobile SIM card purchases by foreign tourists. Under tough new rules, visitors must now register biometrics and obtain digital IDs just to buy a SIM, a bureaucratic maze that mobile operators say has pushed tourists away.
Russia's defense ministry is undergoing its most sweeping internal reform in over a decade, ditching paperwork and digitalizing military admin systems.
From procurement to soldier family benefits, Russia's sprawling defense bureaucracy is getting a digital facelift. Sources tell RBC that over 50 internal processes have already been restructured under a new efficiency department created to streamline the military's clerical operations. Handwritten decrees and paper records, once numbering over 2.5 million annually, are being replaced with automated databases. Families of soldiers can now receive benefit certificates in 5 days instead of 5 months. The reform falls under the Russian defense minister's broader digital agenda and is seen as a step to modernize one of Russia's most opaque institutions. However, analysts warn it could also tighten centralized control and limit transparency under the guise of efficiency.
Central Asia is emerging as a major trade hub, defying geography and expectations. A new report shows the region's landlocked status is no longer a barrier to booming freight traffic.
Despite having no direct access to the sea, Central Asia is seeing record growth in trade. According to a study by the Eurasian Development Bank, goods moving between east and west through the region jumped over 70% in just 5 years. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan now handle the lion's share of this traffic, with railways carrying about 60% of the load. The report highlights 5 key trade routes across Eurasia, with special focus on the north-south corridor, vital for Russia's supply lines and war effort. Container traffic has tripled in the last decade, and projections show it could grow by another 2/3 in the next 5 years. But to keep pace, the region needs over $50 billion in infrastructure investment, plus better logistics and digital systems to cut costs and speed up border crossings.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.